Moving from academia to industry is challenging. Dear listeners, welcome to the Life Career Job Podcast. Join us as we explore the inspiring journeys of STEM PhD scientists who have successfully transitioned from academia to the dynamic world of biotech, biopharma, VC, and beyond. Discover the diverse roles of our guests as they open up about their current and past positions. They shed light on their day to day responsibilities, the impact of their work, and their work life balance. Whether it's in research and development, leadership roles, or even investment banking, each episode provides a unique perspective on the thriving opportunities within these roles. We'll also bring you expert advice on everything from how to dress for an interview, how to negotiate your employment package, how to ask for a promotion, and beyond. Life Career Job is a platform that we are building to help you navigate the challenges of finding your dream STEM job and building your ideal career path so that you can have the whole life that you want. We hope to serve as a beacon of guidance and inspiration in the tumultuous seas of STEM career path exploration. I am your host, Dr. Yamina Bershish, a passionate advocate for career advancement and the creator behind the very successful Dr. GPCR podcast and ecosystem. I obtained my PhD in biochemistry at the University of Montreal. This was followed by two postdocs, one at the Rockefeller University in New York City and a second at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. Less than 11 months before COVID-19 hit, I moved to a senior scientist position at a small biotech company here in the Boston area. Since then, I've worked in sales and marketing at a global life sciences company and in commercialization at a nonprofit organization. And I am now back in the exciting world of biotech. I've also established Dr. GPCR, a not-for-profit ecosystem dedicating to uniting stakeholders with a shared interest in G protein-coupled receptors, also known as GPCRs. GPCRs are a family of proteins that allow you to see, smell, and taste, and are also targeted by almost 50% of FDA-approved drugs. Driven by a mission to improve human health through collaboration and innovation in GPCR drug discovery, Dr. GPCR serves as a nexus for scientists and stakeholders from academia and the private sector, fostering dialogue and catalyzing progress in this vital field. With Life Career Job, we aim to empower you, STEM PhD professionals, in your career journeys. In the episodes to come, I will have the privilege of engaging in candid conversations with guests from diverse careers, each offering invaluable insight and wisdom gained from their personal journeys. Together, we would unravel the intricacies of career trajectories, sharing practical advice and inspiration to embolden you in forging your own path towards professional fulfillment. As we launch into this exciting endeavor, I invite you to join us on this journey of discovery. Subscribe to our podcast on your preferred platform and explore our website where we endeavor to extend our support beyond the confines of the airwaves. Stay tuned for more as together we navigate the boundless horizons of career and life fulfillment. Until next time, stay safe. Hello, everyone. This is Yamina this evening with the Life Career Job Podcast. And today I have with me Eric Perkins. Eric, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Let's start at the beginning. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what do you do?
Sure. My name is Eric Perkins. I have a PhD in molecular biology and genetics. And for the last almost 16 years now, I've been working at the nonprofit plasmid repository Adgene. And when I started at Adgene, it was about 8 people, and now we're about 125. And I've had a lot of different roles in the organization over the years, but now my role is I'm the senior director of organizational transformation, which means that it means a lot of different things, but the big picture overview is that I basically am in charge of helping us implement our strategy. So I look at a lot of cross-team projects and make sure that all of our operational plan, which is tied to our strategy, has deliverables that we can actually deliver, and work with all of our different teams and really capitalize on my institutional knowledge of the last 15 plus years on and knowing how all the different parts of the organization work to make sure that we have the resources we need to implement our strategy and get a lot of cool projects up off the ground and moving forward. And I also do a lot of work with operational excellence and making sure that we're operating efficiently as an organization.
I love it. I really, really love it. Everything you just said is so exciting to me because it's essential. And you went from 8 people at Gene to 125 plus, and hopefully it'll grow nicely over time. And the more people you have in an organization, the more roles like yours become important.
Yes, yes. When I tell people sometimes that, when I started here, um, I had it was basically a startup. And so, people who are in startups tend to wear a lot of hats. And what I did in my first couple of years at Agene is now being done by 4 or 5 different teams of people, like
Yeah,
not just 4 or 5 people, but teams of people.
yeah.
Because I did all the quality control, I did all the customer support, I did all the outreach, what we had of marketing back then. I did lab management, I did a lot of different things, and now we have whole teams of people who are taking care of all those things. But I got a chance to develop those and build that culture here over the years, and so that's what kind of helped me gravitate towards the role I'm in now.
I love it. So PhD in genetics.
Yes, I got my PhD at the University of North Carolina in Chapel
Mhm.
Hill, and then I did a postdoc at Harvard. That's how I ended up back up in the Boston area. I'm from New England originally, so I did a postdoc at Harvard, and then came to Addgene after that.
Did you always know you wanted to be a scientist? I feel like whenever you end up doing a PhD and a postdoc, there is that spark for science, that interest in science. When did that happen to you?
It was pretty early, and I actually just gave a presentation to some high school freshmen at local high school about my how I got interested in science. And I grew up in a very rural area in New Hampshire, and we had a pond on our property. And at some point, my dad found a microscope at a yard sale, an old light microscope at a yard sale, and brought it home. And I figured out how to this was all pre-internet because I'm that old. But I figured out how to, use put pond water on a cover slip and look at things under the microscope, look at little protozoans and things like that. And then so that was sort of what kickstarted things. And I had some really great biology teachers, both even in junior high. I had a great formative biology teacher and some great teachers in high school who really sparked that interest. And I had an interest in English as well, which actually kind of carried over into my career. I double majored as an undergraduate in biotechnology and in English lit. So so writing was always a part of what I did as well,
Yeah.
in communication. But biology has always been really interesting to me. And I would say what I didn't just gravitate towards science. I gravitated specifically towards biology. That was
Biology.
always sort of what I was most interested in. Though I did some biochemistry and some chemistry in graduate school and as an undergraduate as well.
I love it. So you finished your postdoc. Typically people when they go into a postdoc, they think, oh, I'm gonna be a professor.
Mhm.
Um, but in your case, what's the story? How did you end up at Addgene? And when did you realize that professorship may not be for you?
So I would say I wasn't even at the end of graduate school, I wasn't necessarily sure I was going to stay in academia. Um, I was moving up here for back up to the Boston area for personal reasons because my partner she got a postdoc at Brandeis, so I started looking. And we knew the Boston area was a good place for scientists in general.
Yeah.
And I did look at some other places that were not. I did consider some other things that were not postdocs, but this was This is 20 years ago, and at the time, even industry positions and things like that were asking for some postdoc experience frequently, which is less common now than it was back then. Um, and without going into the gory details of my postdoc, it was definitely not a high point in my scientific career, let's put it that way.
That helps.
Um, and over the course of those years at Harvard, I mean, I met some great people there for sure, but it became clear that an academic career was probably not where my interests lied. And part of that, I think what I realized back then, and what I had not quite realized, I came to realize that during my postdoc, was that I didn't want to know everything about one very small part of science. I wanted to learn a little bit about a lot of parts of science and biology.
Yeah.
And so when I started looking for a position post after my postdoc, and it was kind of an emergency situation, to tell you the truth. My grant ran out, my postdoc grant ran out, and my PI said, I can't support you anymore. You have to find something else. Um, I actually found Agene on monster.com, if you can believe that, because I
Wow.
had no idea. At that time, there was not a lot of career development at Harvard. And so I had no idea what I was doing in terms of searching for a job. So I got really
Mhm.
lucky that I found this nonprofit. And at the time, I didn't even know what Agene was. It was not as well known back then.
Yeah.
And when they told me what it was, it appealed to me because it was a nonprofit, and I was interested in doing mission-based work, and I felt like Agene was it was a it was a nice. I wouldn't be working for academia anymore, but I was going to be working for a nonprofit that supported academic science.
Yeah.
And I would get to learn about a lot of different areas of biology in this role, because the way that Agene works is, we work with scientists across many different biology fields all over the world. And so I was like, this is amazing. I get a sneak peek at all these new findings when people work with us. And I got to do exactly what I kind of imagined, where I really my interests were, where I got to learn a little bit about a lot of different areas. And so it was really a nice fit for me. And I got to use my communication, my writing skills, because I was writing a lot of emails with customer support.
Yeah.
And it played into my molecular biology background really well. So it was a really, I, it it was kind of a lucky break, I think, in terms of it happened to come up at the exact right time for me, that the position opened. Um, and it was really it played to my strengths well, I think, in terms of both my biology background and my writing background, and just where my interests lied in general were in general. So that's how I got here. I met the founder, who basically said, the person whose role I was taking over was moving to California in 2 weeks. And they needed me to take over as quickly as possible. And so I got about 2 weeks of training with the person I was replacing, and was truly thrown to the deep end of the pool. And but it wasn't a bad thing. It was very challenging. I had a 1-year-old at home at the time. And so it was that there was also that challenge as well, of being a relatively new dad and having a new role. But
Yeah.
it was fun. I embraced it and decided that this was going to be an interesting challenge. And you know,
Here we are.
16 years later, here I am, still at the same place.
Exactly, exactly. You mentioned that you held different roles throughout this 16 years of time at Adgene. Can you walk us through the different roles and how those, how you liked those, or what were the things that you had to learn in those roles?
Sure. Yeah, so when I initially started, it was really, as I mentioned, it was a little bit of everything. So I was doing customer support, which meant I was answering emails and phone calls from people who had biology questions about plasmids in the
Yeah.
repository. I was doing quality control on all of our plasmids, which is basically, looking at sequence. I was managing our lab at the time. So which I'd never been a manager before. So managing people was a new experience for me. And so I didn't know whether I was going to be good at it. Um, and then as we grew and started to specialize teams a little bit more, um, I eventually moved into a position that we called the scientific project lead, which was like really for larger scale projects that involved multiple teams. I was trying to coordinate efforts. So that was sort of where things really got rolling. And where things really turned a page for me was during that role, Agene was launching what we now call our viral vector service. So we were making AAV virus and lentivirus. And I was responsible for figuring out how to integrate that into our website and our LIMS processing. Our LIMS is our internal lab management engineering. So all of our software is in-house, done in-house by a team of software engineers.
Wow.
And in that role, I learned pretty quickly that scientists and software engineers use a lot of the same terms, but don't necessarily have the same meanings for those terms.
Yeah.
So we were coming out of meetings and I thought they were going really well. And then I would talk to our scientists and our engineers, the next couple of days, and they came out of those meetings with very different interpretations of what was
Yeah.
actually decided. I was like, I got to do something about this. And I created what I call our lexicon, where I defined some terms that were frequently being
Yep.
misconstrued. And just to kind of skip ahead a little bit, ultimately this turned into what we call our product management team. So our product managers were basically a team of people who were um, taking the needs of the organization, whether they were our scientists or our office people, and then translating those into the types of stories that our software engineers could understand and actually create that work.
Yeah.
And that was a formative role for me for sure, because it really helped me. I created a team from scratch that had not existed before, um, and learned a lot about software engineering and what product management is. And um, I did that for quite a few years, and then found another need a few years later where basically a new role, there was another role that was up that I wanted to create it actually. So these roles were ones that I actually suggested myself. They were not said like we need to do this. They were like I feel like Agile is at a point where we need to have this
Yep.
type of role. And the next role was one was called Director of Customer Experience. And so the way that I pitched that was that we have these separate customer support teams, customer support, marketing, product management falls in there because they do a lot of our visuals for our website, um, and marketing. I can't remember if I said that already, but and I said these teams really need to be working closely together because they have similar goals, and they were kind of like all over the place in terms they were working against each other instead of with each other.
Yeah.
So I basically said, and at the time there was a executive director, we were in the process of exchanging executive directors, and I said, look, I'm pretty sure I can manage these teams and kind of get them on the same page, working towards the same goals, synchronize them, and really have them working together much more cleanly. And so that's what I did for another 2 years, is really I created our content team, which did not exist, and kind of pulled that. We had a team that was sort of what I call a junk drawer team, where Like they didn't, nobody really knew what they did, so they just gave them everything that didn't know where else it would go. And I put a stop to that because that was not sustainable and
No.
really gave them a little bit more definition as a team. Is like, this is how you ask of work from this team. This is what you ask them, and this is what they can do for you. And so that was fun. I had a good time putting that together and working with some new directors there, training some managers. Um, so I'd been managing people for quite a while at that point, so I started training some new managers as well. Um, and so that brought me to when our new executive director came on board about a year or so ago. Um, she kind of tapped me relatively early because of my institutional knowledge, as somebody who might be able to help with the role that she was envisioning of director of transformation, because she said,
Mhm.
we're going to have a strategy. We did not really have a strategy before, but we spend a while creating this 5-year strategy, and she wanted somebody who could, you know, tie teams together to work towards these common goals, because we had a lot of teams that were a little siloed. And then
Yeah.
again, instead of working, basically, she wanted me to do what I'd done with the customer experience teams
What
and take
across.
it to the next level of the entire organization and get people much more aligned with each other towards our strategic goals. Um, so that's what I'm doing,
Wow.
or that's what I'm trying to do, I should say. Um, and I think it does play to my strengths in a lot of ways. I don't manage people directly in this role right now, though I will be getting a report sometime in the next few months, I think. Um, but what we're really doing now with this role is Agene has really been a very vertically aligned organization for a while. And my role is really more of a lateral sort of centralized role where I can really oversee these cross-team projects and not be influenced by whatever vertical category I'm in,
Yeah.
basically. So I'm
Yeah.
I'm sort of the Switzerland of these groups to some
Yeah.
extent, and that I'm supposed to be able to um tackle these projects from a relatively objective position within my role.
I love it. I love it. You're creating a marching band, making sure that everybody's marching in the same direction and the beat is the correct beat. Everybody's doing what needs to be done.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a that's a good analogy. Yeah, the other analogy that I used because I was trying to think, how the heck do I explain this role to ninth graders? And the analogy that I used with them was, let's say you have a lemonade stand and you have like some competition that's moved in down the street. So you decide that you need to do something else in order to give you a leg up on that new lemonade stand, and they have something that you don't have.
Yeah.
So you've got to do some research to figure out what you can do differently. Well, let's say you do that research and you decide that you want to sell cookies, and that will give you that edge. I said, well, if you do that, you have to figure out, well, what's your cookie recipe? Who's going to be your baker? What kind of oven do you need to buy? What kind of regulations do you need from the town that you can actually make cookies? All, like, there's a whole laundry list of things. And that's
Wow.
part of my job in transformation, is to come up with all those things that we need to check off in order
Yeah.
to move that change forward, basically.
I love it. No, I really do love it, and you do seem like you're in your element. Based just by the energy that comes through the way you're explaining things. You're in the right role at the right place at the right time, which is really, really pleasant. And you were explaining the different roles you were in, and I had goosebumps because I think these are fundamental things that need to happen in every organization, whether you're in a nonprofit or a for-profit, a biotech. It to some extent or to some level, even in an academic lab, there needs to be some of this. And unfortunately, what you just walked us through is the exception, and this should be the norm,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, and I always wonder, how do organizations that don't have these structures built in, these operational processes, these sitting down and having a vision and building out a strategy for the next 5 years function in general. If you don't have any of this and you have departments and people in different teams who are trying to do their best, but you need somebody to help or multiple people to help bring these under the same denominator.
Yeah. And the other thing that I'm trying to do, um, which kind of comes from my years in product management. So when you in our what our engineering and our product teams introduced within their teams is this concept of being agile, which is, creating a roadmap, thinking about what you're going to do in 3 months' time, 6 months' time, but recognizing that like you can plan things out pretty concretely about 3 months in advance.
Yeah,
But once you start getting past that, things start to get a little more fuzzy, and you have to realize that, external things might happen which change your plans.
absolutely.
And you have to be, in the world of being agile, you have to be able to pivot or reprioritize because what's important in January may not be as important in, August or September.
Yeah.
And this is actually something I know there are labs, like large academic labs, that are trying to implement that type of like ability to, you have to plan projects pretty far in advance, but, all it takes is, one of your competitors publishing a paper on something very
Yeah.
similar, and
Yeah.
suddenly you have to pivot. And so being prepared to do that, I think is as applicable in industry as it is in academic labs as it is in a
Yeah.
nonprofit like Ag.
No, I agree. I agree. I think when it comes to higher level goals or larger goals, the way I think about them is this thing where you may never get to it because you may
Hmm.
never, you know, get to it, but everything that you do, all the small little milestones and goals should get you closer to it. One thing I can think of is Dr. GPCR and the ecosystem. Our goal is to bring together people from academia and industry so that they can meet, collaborate, and together we can better understand GPCR biology. Will
Yep.
we ever better understand and fully characterize GPCR biology? I don't know. It's going to take a while. But if every small thing that you do to get you there is going to get you closer. And you're right, you need to be able to pivot and change things very quickly because, as you said, somebody might be publishing something in another academic lab, or I don't know, the postdoc might decide to leave and then you need to find somebody else, and then, or the cells decide that they won't express your receptor of interest anymore,
Yep.
which happens as well.
Yep.
Same thing with biotech and other organizations.
Yeah. Yeah. The concept that we're trying to really instill here is really thinking from the big picture level, like what is the outcome that you're moving towards? Not
Yes.
necessarily like what is there's goal, you want to set goals, but goals can change. Like outcome is sort of like a long-term vision that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah,
It's not like a project that comes to an end. It's just something that you're constantly moving towards. And
exactly.
it's going to be a little bit different for a place like Agene where, we're really aiming at a mission of making science easier for as many
Yeah,
scientists as possible, as opposed to, if you're in pharma or a biotech, there's going to be a monetary value there as
yeah,
well. Not that
yeah.
we don't think about money at Agene, we do, but it's in parallel with fulfilling our mission, so it's a little bit different.
No, absolutely. And it's interesting because every time I've encountered so many people when they hear nonprofit, they don't understand that nonprofit only means that you don't have you don't have shareholders. You obviously have a mission, but money is still important because you need to be able to grow, you need to be able to hire people, you need to be able to have the resources to work towards that goal and fulfill that mission.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as much as, it's I do sometimes feel like I'm working within a duality in that I'm working for a nonprofit organization, but I'm also working for an e-commerce website that sells
Yeah.
services.
Yeah.
for money through our website, which is a lot of, what I've done over the last few years with our
Yeah.
content team and our design teams is like
Yeah.
really thinking about what is that digital portal that we're
Yeah.
reaching out to scientists,
Yeah.
and it's a whole different skill set. But it's sort of like I have to keep both those things in mind that we, in order to fulfill that mission, we have to make money. And
Yeah.
so that's a very important thing to keep in mind the whole time.
I think so too. I think it's very much the case because you need it. You need money in order to, to fuel the car, but you need to be able to build a beautiful car so that people can actually come and use it.
Yeah.
And because otherwise it just doesn't work out.
Yeah, yeah. And
And
it's been interesting, our evolution as an organization, because for a long time we kind of stayed away from businessy terms. Even the word like customer was a little taboo for us because it seemed very businessy, or
yeah,
sales or something like
yeah,
that. And over the last few years, we've come to use those terms more frequently because
yeah,
we recognize that we are also a business as well.
yeah, yeah,
So that's one of the, I think, one of the things that I talk about when I give, um, over the years, I've given some career talks about nonprofit options, nonprofit STEM jobs, and thinking about what types of skills you learn as a scientist that are suitable for a nonprofit work. And one of the skills, that transferable skills or soft skills, however you want to call them, that I've pointed out is like when you're in science, you end up learning a lot of different sort of professional languages because one day you might
yeah,
be talking to a molecular biologist and then a biochemist and then a geneticist or a biophysicist, what have you. And you have to sort of figure out what is that person's background and what is their
yeah,
language that they use to talk about their science. And so I've expanded what skills I picked up during my, grad school and my postdoc to that next level of, all right, I need to learn how to talk to business people now and software engineers and legal people because everybody has their own jargon, their own
yeah,
vocabulary. So that's one of the things when I have to start working with a new type of team, I'm like, all right, I need to learn how to speak with them
yeah,
with their language. Um,
yeah.
and that's one of the skills that I've tried to take into this role, and I try to share it with other people as well. Is like, if that's something you enjoy doing, which I do, I like to learn. Other than maybe the legal people, like talking to lawyers is probably always going to be hard for me. But but I have done it, and I will continue to do it. Um, it's an interesting part of the role. I really do feel like I'm learning a new language sometimes when I get to talk to the business folks and learn their jargon a little bit.
And I agree. You mentioned having the product management team and then having the software engineers. And you're right. You absolutely have to make sure that everybody uses the same language and all the terms mean the same thing to both parties. And
Hmm.
it's similar to working with computational chemists or medicinal chemists, and the chemists think about one thing and the biologist thinks about another thing. And these are very important skills. And if you like to learn, that's something that can be to your benefit in general when you get to interact with all these people.
Yeah, yeah, we've actually hired a number of people here over the years who have both, wet lab and dry lab experience,
Mhm.
because people who can kind of walk that line between those worlds are sometimes hard to find. So if you can find somebody who can do it, it's
Yeah.
it's it's nice to have those types of people who can talk both languages.
Exactly. No, I love it. I have a question here that says, "How did you plan your career trajectory?" But before you answer that, I feel like at Adgene, in the past 16 plus years, based on what you just told us, you entered the organization and then seeing what was missing, you kind of created your own career trajectory and your own I'm not sure if you thought about the planning itself, but it kind of presented itself based on the needs of the organization. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I was also wondering before while doing your PhD or your postdoc, or at any point, did you sit down and say, okay, today is, I don't know, February 12th. Here is what I'm thinking, or here's my mission, and I'm
Yeah.
working towards that mission.
I I wish I could say that I had done that. I think, but I don't think I did it as like if I were to go back and talk to myself, particularly as I was thinking about, that going into a postdoc, um, really sitting down and thinking about what parts of graduate school I really liked, and what I felt that I was good at. And like one of the things in hindsight that I can say, and one of the things that people used to do with me in graduate school is, oh, you're so good at like explaining your science to like your parents or people who don't necessarily have like a background,
Yeah.
because I would come up with analogies and things like that. So people would be like, hey, how do I explain what I do to my parents or to my partner or something like that? I'm like, well, and so we would walk through that. And it was like that was something that I really liked doing. I liked to do that. And if I but I didn't really recognize like, oh, that's something that I could have like really thoughtfully put into my career earlier on instead of
Yeah.
more stumbling upon it a little bit later. Um, so I think, that's something when I talk to, you know, early career scientists, I think for a long time, and I think this is really changing now. But for a long time, at least when I was doing this, it was like, oh, what kind of assays can you do? And what kind of, what are your
Yeah.
technical skills?
Yeah.
And there was not a lot of talk about, did you form a student group and become a leader in your student group? Or did you enjoy managing,
Yeah.
that undergraduate in your lab or something like that?
Yeah.
And how can you spin that into something that would, that you want to think about at the next stage of your career? So really those non-technical skills, um, I started thinking about them with being a lot more thoughtful about what my non-technical skills were. I would say like a year or two into Agene, I was like, what part of this job do I really like? And I liked
Yeah.
managing people. I liked the communication aspect of it. And the cross team work. And I was like, how do I play to those not just strengths, but the things that I actually like doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
I did not like doing quality control. I did not like staring at sequence. So that's also important
Yeah.
actually, is thinking about what you don't like because you don't want to get stuck
Yeah.
in a job where you're just like doing that thing that is like your least favorite thing,
No, no,
basically.
you're absolutely right, and it's so fun. It's so interesting, but I wonder if this comes with age, because in the past couple of years, I also got to a point where I can very quickly tell you I like to do this, and or I hate to do this, and I know from time to time you still have to do things that you don't particularly enjoy, but if you can find a role in which the majority of the tasks that you have to accomplish are the ones that are appealing to you, that you enjoy doing, the time at work just flies by because you're in your element.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I wish I wish I had if I could go back in time and tell myself this 10, 20 years ago, maybe I would have been recording this podcast, sooner.
Yeah, and there's a lot of sort of different levels you can take that to. There's, the other thing that I mentioned earlier that I liked I like having some, sort of diversity in what I'm doing. So that I know some people here at Agene who like really appreciate the routine of like they know exactly what they're doing every day. They come in and they do their this is, PhD scientists as well. They come in
Yeah,
and it's sort of like this is the fence that I'm painting today, and they
yeah,
wash it and they feel like I can see everything that I've done and I've accomplished, this is the work
yeah,
that I've done.
yeah,
I'm not like that. If I have, it's very rare that I have 2 days in a row that are very similar. Like I like to have like a different, not that I necessarily want to be surprised every day, but I like having like a mix of different things to focus on and
yeah,
do. And I've really gravitated towards the types of roles where I am going to be doing something a little bit different every day. And when people ask me that question of like, what is your average day
Which
look
is my
like.
next question exactly. So
Yeah, just
you're taking us there. There you go.
yeah. When people ask me that question in like informational interviews and things like that, I'm like, that is a really, it's a genuinely hard question for me to answer because
Yeah,
I've kind of molded my career to say that I don't have an average day.
yeah.
I could literally, I wrote an article on LinkedIn years ago after a day where within one day I'd talked our software engineers through a tricky thing that our lab was trying to do. I dealt with putting out a fire on our shipping team because some new custom law in Asia had changed, and now we had to change our customs. And it was like three or four completely disparate things that all made sense in the role in the nature of my role that I was working on. Like, but I sat down at the end of the day and I was like, if I had known, at 23 years old, 25 years old, that I would think about how like custom laws in China were going to affect my day, I would have there's no way I could have even contemplated
Yeah,
that. And now it's just like an everyday thing that I actually
yeah,
understood that.
yeah,
And it was like, that's really cool that I get to do
yeah.
that now. So that's sort of where like I've gravitated towards those types of roles where I am sometimes I complain that if there's too many fires to put out, then that can get stressful. But I feel like I have moved towards those types of roles where I'm in a position that I can help with that and I can expect the unexpected to some extent
Yeah,
and
yeah.
roll with it and have a way of approaching it that doesn't make it too stressful for me.
I love it. I love it. So you don't have a typical day, which is what you like, which is I think it's I'm very much like you in the sense that in the current role that I have right now, in the beginning, I started this role about 6 to 8 months ago. And in the beginning, it was all over the place meetings. And I was talking to someone in the company, and they said, Yamina, you can switch out these meetings and do organize your schedule just as you want it to. So
Mhm.
now my days are very quote unquote organized because I have meeting days and I have no meeting days.
Yep.
And on the meeting days, I know that it's going to be back to back to back to back meetings. I have to make decisions live on calls. But on the non meeting days, anything can happen.
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
get data back, positive, super exciting, get to plot it, get to discuss it, show it, talk about it. Or I can get negative data, or I can do pretty annoying things, but I have to do them because it's part of my role in a startup now. And I
Yeah.
can't wait. I have to say this. I cannot wait to have a direct report who can help me do these things, who actually enjoys doing these activities that I'm good at, but I think I don't enjoy them anymore. I've done it so many times that I just don't enjoy it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good feeling when you can delegate something that to somebody. And I've done some of that. I don't have a full-time direct report right now. I went from a team of four directors to in my new role, I have like 20% of one person.
Wow.
Um, but I was just telling my our executive director today, like I've gotten to a good groove with that one person. And like there's a component of my role that would not be progressing if I could not delegate some of those tasks to her
Yeah.
because there just
Yeah.
wouldn't be time in my schedule.
Yeah.
But I do, I've done the same thing that you have, and this is a relatively new thing for me that I block off focus time when I see a 2 hour spot on my calendar that I'm gonna, I'll throw some focus time up there so nobody schedules me for that. Because,
Yeah.
if I have something that I need to write, a deliverable that is coming
Yeah.
due, I don't want to be thinking about it at 5:30 at night after a day of meetings. I want to be
Yeah.
doing it during the day when my mind is still alert.
Yeah.
So,
No, I agree.
yeah.
I agree. I have this as well. I have a every day from 9 to 10 a.m. I have avoid booking meetings in my calendar because I like to go through my emails or do something else if need be. And I have days when it says do not book meetings.
Yeah.
Where if there's any meeting, somebody will ask me, say, okay, I don't find any other time in your calendar. Can I put it in there? And
Mhm.
most days, most of those days are dedicated to focused individual work. And then I have 2 or 3 days where it's meetings all over the place.
Yeah. The other thing that I've started doing, and this is another thing that I kind of carried over from the product management and software world, is I have my own, well, it's not just mine now, it's now me and this other person that I'm working with, but my team of 1.2 people basically have a Kanban board, which is basically I set it up in where I have all the different things that I'm working on in like a to-do column, in progress, in review, and then done. And
Yeah,
that's a very common tool in the software world for working on stories.
yeah,
And and I look at it, I try to update it at least 2 or 3 times a week to see where things are. And I try to really I look very closely at that in progress column, because if I have like too many things in that column, it's like, all right, there's no way I can deliver good
yeah,
results if I have
yeah,
6 things on my in progress mode. So and sometimes all those things are due, and I'll say, okay, if you want me to do this well, I'm moving this one back over to do, and we're going to talk about a different deadline or reduce the scope of that thing so it's
yeah,
just less work.
yeah,
And just having that visual aid for me has been really helpful. So I was like, okay, that's a reasonable amount of work for me to do this week. And and if I have to add anything else into my in process column, then something needs to move out of it, basically.
yeah. Yeah, I like that. So I actually do, I have two things, and I think this pretty much answers the question, how do you juggle between all your applications?
Yeah.
Um, I use Trello, which I very much like,
Yep.
and I do have a to do, an in progress, done, and I have a column that says references because there's links in there and I don't have to look anywhere else. I just use
Hmm.
that, which is very useful. The other thing I've done is I actually we use Gmail and I reformatted all my Gmail inboxes. And so I
Hmm.
have it's actually split up into 4 sections where I have my inbox. I have a follow-up, a to read, and awaiting response sections. And as soon as an email comes in, it ends up either archived because there's nothing to do, or in any of those sections. And every 2 or 3 days, I actually go through these and empty out stuff as much as possible so that I have a zero inbox in there, which helps. Although I
I'm
have to,
laughing because I'm not going to tell you how many things I have in my inbox right now. You are
well, I was
much
just
more.
gonna in my personal inbox right now, I have 1,800 emails. In my work inbox, I have 18. Just
Yeah.
because I started separating this into 4 inboxes. First, in my work email, my personal, I'm tempted to archive everything and start fresh because there's
Yeah.
just too much stuff.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that helps me too.
I'm definitely not as disciplined with the email, and I do need to get better. But to be fair, at least for the work side, we actually don't use email as much at Adgene. We use Slack for a lot of our inter-office communication.
Yeah, yeah,
And my job is, I would say, 90% internal right now in terms of who I'm working with.
yeah,
Um, but that Kanban board that I use, is another Atlassian. So Trello is an Atlassian
yeah.
product. So we use Jira. We
Hmm.
we we do have Trello at Adgene. I've set up my board in Jira because then I can actually, that's what a lot of different teams are using.
Okay.
So I can assign tasks within that to other people
Mm,
within the organization from there, which you can do with Trello as well.
yeah.
But I can actually assign things over to Trello even from Jira because they're all that
Good
same
night.
suite of
Yeah.
products. But that was something that we started with Trello, and we kind of outgrew that eventually, though some people still use it, and now we're using Jira and Confluence, which is sort of like a
Yeah.
wiki within that Atlassian
Yeah.
product range. Yep.
Yeah. 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 I've used Confluence and also used well, Trello.
Yeah.
But yeah, I realized that my brain cannot contain all that information. I cannot remember all those things. So I
Mhm.
went from being a person who remembered almost everything to someone who doesn't have to remember anything other than where the location of the information is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know
I've
where I
never
can.
been very good at remembering, so I've always had to have some tool. So memory is not my strong point. Well, that's not true. I mean, I have that kind of goes to the institutional knowledge. Like if somebody says, "Oh, why don't we try this?" I have the
Mhm.
type of long-term memory where I can say, like, "Oh, and you know what? We tried that 4 years ago, and this is what happened." I just
Yeah.
can't remember what I told somebody I would do like 5 hours ago. So that I
I
try to capture.
I like that. I love it. All right. What is your advice to people who want to build a career in the nonprofit world in roles similar to what you've had before or you have now?
Sure. Um, so somebody asked me about where do you find nonprofit STEM jobs,
Hmm.
and I actually had a hard time finding it at the time, like finding a place to do that. I this was 5 or 6 years ago. I ended up creating a list on Twitter, now X, of nonprofit STEM jobs,
Hmm.
which I have not been active on Twitter for a while now, but I'm thinking about other ways to capture that. There are resources out there for if you just Google nonprofit STEM, there are
Yeah.
more resources now than there were even 5 or 6 years
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
Um, and I would say, think about, we talked about transferable skills a little bit, thinking about what kind of role you might play to your strengths. Um, I would say working at a nonprofit is in some ways, depending on the nature of the nonprofit, is in some ways similar to working at a startup where
Yeah.
if you feel like you're the type of person that could wear a lot of hats, and this maybe is the most applicable thing, and what was true of me is if you work for a nonprofit or a startup, I think there's a lot of parallels there, and you're not sure what your long-term career plans are, having that kind of exposure to a lot of different roles where you can try,
Yeah.
where not only are you allowed to try new things, but you have to try new things,
Yeah.
is a great way to sort of be like, oh, I liked that part of my job and this part of my job. I wonder where that could go. And that's actually something that's happened with a lot of the people here at Adgene, where they came in sort of like a generic senior scientist kind of role
Hmm.
and realize, over some time of having lots of different jobs, they said, "Oh, I really like writing content, or I really enjoy managing the lab people, or some people really like the quality, that sort of the repetitive nature of quality of
Yeah.
doing quality control." And if you can, if that appeals to you, I would actually say it's a good type of job to get into if you don't know exactly what you want to do,
Yeah.
to tell you the
Yeah.
truth,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it gives you that exposure to a lot of different things. Um, and sometimes that's what people need. Some people are very laser focused. Like, I want to manage a lab or I want to be this type of person. And some people, I felt like when I came into Agene, it was almost like I was entering school undeclared in my career to some extent.
Yeah.
It's like I
Yeah.
need to try some different things. And I
Yeah.
feel like nonprofits are a nice place to do that.
I love it. I love it. And the way I think about it is kind of this formula is first you need to figure out what you like, what you don't like. But I think what you just mentioned is a step before that. Get into a role where you can test out the waters and then
Mhm.
create this list of this is what I'm good at, I like to do. This is what I'm good at, I don't like to do. Or this is what
Mhm.
I'm not good at. And then try and find a position or a job where you get to spend most of your time doing the things that you like, that you're really good at, and
Yeah.
then go from there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's certainly, I've seen a lot of people here go in some great directions in their careers, and a lot of them, don't necessarily stay in that nonprofit world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, because it doesn't pay as much as big pharma or something like that necessarily, but it gives them that sort of foot in the door of like, oh, this is
Yeah.
what I could do at that next level type of job.
Yeah.
And I've seen people have some really cool careers here from coming from scientists. The nice thing about nonprofits, maybe I almost hesitate to say this, but coming from academia, people are used to not getting paid very much.
Yeah.
So getting paid a little bit more
More.
at a nonprofit is just like
Yeah.
you're not expecting to go in and getting, a six-figure salary right off the bat
Yeah.
necessarily.
Yeah.
So it's a nice stepping stone.
Yeah.
Um, for before you go to that next level of your career,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
And
And
but some people stay. For me, I've stayed and I've really enjoyed it. And um, it's a long-term career as well for folks for a lot of people.
yeah, I love it. I forgot to ask, do you have a hard stop at the top of the hour? We have about a
I
minute.
I don't. No.
Okay, perfect. Then we can I have two more questions, but I want to follow up
Sure.
on what you just mentioned. And the fact that in a nonprofit you would get the opportunity to wear different hats in order to figure out what you like. I think coming out of academia, we're so focused on the hard skills. I know
Hmm.
how to run this assay, I know how to read a paper, I know how to write a scientific paper. And unfortunately, we don't get a chance to practice our soft skills, our interpersonal skills as much as in, I want to say, a job. And I think going into a nonprofit and into a role outside of academia is also, in the beginning, is also a great way to develop these skills and to
Hmm.
use them. And I think everybody has a natural tendency for something, and being able to figure out what's your natural tendency, what are you really good at,
Hmm.
also helps build character and confidence,
Yeah.
because we're not born with confidence. You get confident with experience, you have to make mistakes, and then you have to learn from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have absolutely made plenty of mistakes
who,
in
who
this role.
hasn't?
And but I go into them not, as long as you're learning from those mistakes
Yeah.
and thinking about like what could have gone better next time.
Yeah.
That's actually one of the things that I've spun up here. I just had this conversation with one of our managers last week because I started up a new thing about that we call stories of operational excellence, where I want teams to tell a story about how they fixed a pain point and like really tell a story from beginning to end. And one of my prerequisites is don't glaze over the failures. I want you
Yeah.
to talk about what went wrong,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that's where the learning comes in.
Yeah.
And that's also sort of a cultural thing here, is you want to give that psychological safety where it's okay to say, like, it's okay to admit when you made a mistake,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
And if you hide them, that's the worst case scenario because that means somebody else is going to make that same mistake down the road.
Absolutely. I love that. I call them lessons learned. There's no
Yeah,
such thing as mistakes or failures. It's a lesson learned. And as you said, if it's one time you learn from it and then you move on, then it's not a problem at all.
yeah, yep.
If you could go back in time, what advice would you give yourself? And how far back would you go back in time? I think we kind of touched on it, but
Yeah, we touched upon that a little bit. I think, when I was coming out of graduate school, I was already sort of like a little iffy on whether or not the postdoc was the right route for me.
mhm,
And I think in hindsight, I would have tried a little bit harder to find a non-postdoc position, possibly.
yeah, yeah,
Not that my postdoc was a complete dead end. I did learn a lot during that time, but it was definitely more, I learned more about what I didn't want to do than what I wanted to do, I would say. Um, and I do think that like more and more graduate students are bypassing their postdocs
yeah,
now. But I think if I were to go back, I would probably be tell myself like think about those parts of graduate school that were not technical
yeah,
that you enjoyed and what types of jobs, you like showing people how to do things. That's one of the things that I like to do. I liked training people.
yeah,
Um, I was not necessarily very good at coming up with brand new experience, experiments. That was not a strong point for me, but I could show people new techniques, and I enjoyed showing people how to do that. And those are the types of like really being taking that step out of yourself a little bit
Yeah.
earlier in your career for graduate students, particularly, and thinking about what aspect of this beyond the types of assays that I do I really like? And
Yeah.
what types of careers could be spun out of that, basically?
I agree. I think this is really cool. How much, in percentage, how much do you think luck versus hard work helped you get to where you are today?
Um, I would say stumbling upon Agene itself was pretty lucky. Like I mean, Monster,
Monster.com.
the fact that I found them on monster.com, because they didn't know what they were doing either back then. They didn't have an HR department or anything like that. So that was, there was definitely some luck there. Um, I would say the trajectory from there after of like really thinking about as the organization grew and thinking about how
Yeah.
can I fill these gaps that I see opening up as we get bigger. That was I would give myself some credit there as far as the hard work
You
of
should.
like identifying those needs and
Yeah.
figuring and learning, because I took classes, I read books, I did a lot of things because we didn't have anybody who knew how to do those things. So I took it upon myself to learn. Um, that was where a lot of that hard work came in. So I think, I would say maybe 2080 in terms of that percentage of luck
Hmm.
to hard work. Um, I have since made it sort of a personal mission with some of the young scientists that I met to try to even remove some of that initial luck. You
Yeah.
shouldn't have to just stumble upon your job if you create networks.
Yeah.
And really that's actually something I would go back and also tell myself back then
Mhm.
is because I felt like networking was this sort of dirty thing that, like, as an introvert, I really did not like going to networking mixers and things like that.
Yeah.
But I taught myself other ways to network and take advantage of that network.
Yeah.
And that is something that I would really encourage young people to do is like networking does not just mean going to a networking event and hobnobbing with complete strangers. It's
Yeah.
also like looking at that person sitting at the bench next to you and keeping in touch with them 5 years later because they might be in a really cool job and they
Yeah.
might have an opening for you. And keeping those types of connections, I think, is important. So that's where you can remove a little bit of that luck in finding your next position if you create a good network early on in your career.
I love that. I also hated going to networking mixers because I was absolutely useless
Yeah.
most of the time. I think from a networking perspective, this is networking.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
people might get to know you. They will reach out to me and say, "Hey, I really love the episode with Eric. Can you introduce me?" Or vice versa. And also, being nice, and as you mentioned, being nice and keeping in touch with your benchmate, with the person in the across the hall from the other lab, helping out, being always, I think, being kind and helping out others. You never know
Yeah.
who will refer you to any job. And it happened to me numerous times where I was at one thing, I was at a conference and I presented a poster. So this French speaking postdoc came to me, and I speak French. So we started chit-chatting and he liked my poster and he said, "Oh, wait a minute, let me introduce you to my roommate," because I was at a Gordon conference. So he introduces to the roommate, who then says, "Oh my God, this would be so cool. We should collaborate." So we end up collaborating, and my next I did two postdocs, that's a whole other story. And then my next postdoc came out of this encounter because I met his PI, who then said, "Oh, I know somebody who's hiring. Do you want an introduction?"
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know?
absolutely. One of my lab mate from graduate school, we had kept in touch, and he was one of my best friends from graduate school. And 10, 11 years after we both defended, he had gone more in a business direction. And Adgene was looking for a business analyst with a science background. I'm like, well, I know somebody who might be interested in moving up to Boston from Tennessee. And, 10 years later, I've got one of my best friends working down the hall from me because we stayed in
Wow.
touch, and he's been a great fit for Adgene, and it's been a great fit for him. And you just don't want to take those relationships for granted because you never know what
Yeah,
it'll turn into.
exactly. No, this is wonderful. Any last words of wisdom for the audience?
Um, I really wish I'd written something down for this. So I'll have to riff a little bit. I think I think it is really important. I think there was a period of time where I really waited for the opportunities to come to me. And it was really a conscious decision on my part to be like a little bit more proactive and sort of, I'm not always the bravest person, but I went to my boss at the time one day and I was like, look, I think Adgene really needs this new type of position. Like, and I listed off my reasons, like, here's why I think we need it, and here's why I think I would be a good person to fill that role. And that was a big leap for me to be able to do that. Um, and it's not always going to work. I'm not going to promise people that that will always work out for them. But if you, a lot of, I feel like particularly in newer organizations or younger organizations or companies, like really keeping an eye out for what are those pain points or things that could be fixed if you had this type of role, and
Yeah,
proposing it, because don't wait for somebody else to come up with that role for you.
yeah,
Think about it yourself and propose it to your supervisor or whoever would listen, and
yeah.
hopefully they'll be receptive towards that.
I love it. No, I think this is absolutely valuable because no one will come and knock at your door and say, "Hey, I think our organization is missing this, and I think you should be the person to lead this."
Yeah.
It's always the other way around. And if you don't ask, you don't know what's gonna happen. Worst case, they're gonna say no, but at least you tried.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so yeah, it's a hard thing, and also yeah, the wisdom of like a lot of scientists are introverts, but you do have a network. I think I've given a talk about networking for introverts before, because there's I remember I was speaking to a whole room full of scientists at a conference, and I asked, how many of you identify as introverts, and like literally 80% of the audience raised their hands. I'm like, of course you do, because you're scientists. So let's think about how you can network. And so
Yeah,
that's something that I think, no, it's never too early to or too late to start thinking
yeah.
about how to do that.
No, agreed, agreed. Eric, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for your time.
Sure. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Don't go anywhere. Moving from academia to industry is challenging. Dear listeners, welcome to the Life Career Job Podcast. Join us as we explore the inspiring journeys of STEM PhD scientists who have successfully transitioned from academia to the dynamic world of biotech, biopharma, VC, and beyond. Discover the diverse roles of our guests as they open up about their current and past positions. They shed light on their day to day responsibilities, the impact of their work, and their work life balance. Whether it's in research and development, leadership roles, or even investment banking, each episode provides a unique perspective on the thriving opportunities within these roles. We'll also bring you expert advice on everything from how to dress for an interview, how to negotiate your employment package, how to ask for a promotion, and beyond. Life Career Job is a platform that we are building to help you navigate the challenges of finding your dream STEM job and building your ideal career path so that you can have the whole life that you want. We hope to serve as a beacon of guidance and inspiration in the tumultuous seas of STEM career path exploration. I am your host, Dr. Yamina Bershish, a passionate advocate for career advancement and the creator behind the very successful Dr. GPCR podcast and ecosystem. I obtained my PhD in biochemistry at the University of Montreal. This was followed by two postdocs, one at the Rockefeller University in New York City and a second at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. Less than 11 months before COVID-19 hit, I moved to a senior scientist position at a small biotech company here in the Boston area. Since then, I've worked in sales and marketing at a global life sciences company and in commercialization at a nonprofit organization. And I am now back in the exciting world of biotech. I've also established Dr. GPCR, a not-for-profit ecosystem dedicating to uniting stakeholders with a shared interest in G protein-coupled receptors, also known as GPCRs. GPCRs are a family of proteins that allow you to see, smell, and taste, and are also targeted by almost 50% of FDA-approved drugs. Driven by a mission to improve human health through collaboration and innovation in GPCR drug discovery, Dr. GPCR serves as a nexus for scientists and stakeholders from academia and the private sector, fostering dialogue and catalyzing progress in this vital field. With Life Career Job, we aim to empower you, STEM PhD professionals, in your career journeys. In the episodes to come, I will have the privilege of engaging in candid conversations with guests from diverse careers, each offering invaluable insight and wisdom gained from their personal journeys. Together, we would unravel the intricacies of career trajectories, sharing practical advice and inspiration to embolden you in forging your own path towards professional fulfillment. As we launch into this exciting endeavor, I invite you to join us on this journey of discovery. Subscribe to our podcast on your preferred platform and explore our website, where we endeavor to extend our support beyond the confines of the airwaves. Stay tuned for more as together we navigate the boundless horizons of career and life fulfillment. Until next time, stay safe.